And now I would like to introduce our speakers for today. Kathryn Kellam grew up in South Carolina and has loved having her fingers in the dirt since childhood. She moved to Virginia nearly 30 years ago, and after a career in the professional development and research, became a certified master gardener in 2017. Kathryn's greatest pleasure in gardening is being able to eat what she grows. She is active in public education and leads the urban agriculture planning team, provides gardening answers during the pandemic as part of the remote help desk team, and enjoys providing support to her neighbors in Alexandria. She is nurturing a tiny young food forest in her small urban garden. Susan Wilhelm grew up in Michigan and has moved to DC after college for a job in public policy. Her earliest garden memory is of her parents amending the soil in the backyard garden specifically for growing raspberries. She and her husband often joke that they bought their house in Alexandria primarily because it had enough sun and space to grow tomatoes, one of my personal favorites too. Susan is an avid reader, loves to eat, and studies ikebana, Japanese flower arranging. As an extension master gardener, she's a member of the MGNV social media committee, primarily writing book reviews. Susan also co-teaches public education classes on vegetable gardening and herbs like today, and co-mentors public education teams. So we welcome them. All right, guys, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, well, good morning. I'm Kathryn Kellam, and welcome to the Kitchen Herb Garden. Susan and I are really looking forward to talking with you today about growing and using culinary herbs. In terms of our program, we're going to start out by looking at some basic terminology. What's an herb versus what's a spice? And what do we mean when we talk about flavor? Because at the end of the day, an herb garden is really a flavor garden. We also have a handout that we hope will help you choose the best herbs and spices for your garden. And we have some pictures to hopefully inspire your creative thinking about where you might actually plant your herbs, with a focus on gardening in limited space. Now we're going to be presenting 12 culinary herbs and spices today, 6 for full sun and 6 for part sun. But we want you container gardeners to know that all 12 of these plants do well in containers, and some of them actually need to be grown in containers. And for those aspiring container gardeners out there, we actually have a recorded class in our virtual classroom at mgnv.org. Now, we're also going to be sharing some tips for planting, harvesting, using, and preserving your herbs. And we're going to share some best practices and some resources to help you be a more successful herb gardener. Of course, we'll break for questions at key points during the program. So let's get started. What's an herb? What's a spice? And what do we mean by flavor? Well, if you ask a chef, they're going to say that all of their flavorings are herbs. That's just the terminology they use. But if you go to the grocery store to buy a bottle of dried herbs, you're going to have to look for it in the spice section. So obviously people are using these terms somewhat interchangeably. That's okay. But there is a technical difference, and we want to share that. So herbs are the soft parts of a plant that we use for flavoring. Typically the leaves, the soft green stems, and maybe flowers. And some examples from today's program are thyme, basil, rosemary, and cilantro. One of the great things about herbs is that many of them grow really well in temperate climates, which means that we can grow a broad range of herbs here in Northern Virginia. Now contrast that with spices, which are basically the other parts of the plant that we might use for flavoring, and they tend to be more rigid plant structures. So seeds, twigs, fruits, roots, even bark, those are all spices. And some examples from our program today are coriander seed, garlic, and turmeric. Now, many of the spices that we're familiar with and use in our kitchens actually prefer and in many cases require a tropical climate. And there are some exceptions, however. If you look at the top smaller photos on this slide, you will see pictures of baby ginger and turmeric from my garden last year. We will talk about both of those today and how we can grow them successfully in Northern Virginia with a little bit of tender loving care. Now, what about flavor? Well, we wanted to talk about flavor because we recognize, Susan and I both, that it's a very individual thing. And it's actually a combination of what happens on our tongue in terms of the 5 tastes that our tongue is able to perceive, but also all of the aromas and the fragrances, the whole olfactory experience. And it's the tongue plus the nose together that give us our flavor experience. But there are individual differences in what and how much we can taste and smell certain chemicals, and also in some cases, genetic differences in what we can appreciate for flavor. And then we get to individual differences in terms of how we describe flavors. And that can make that sound a little bit confusing. I've got a couple of examples here on the slide. Now imagine 3 friends sharing a pitcher of lemonade. One might describe it as tart, another as bright, and a third as sharp. Or imagine they're sharing a pot of hot green tea. One might describe the flavor as savory, another say subtle, and the third say it's earthy. And we share this because Susan and I are going to try to share some common descriptions of herb and spice flavors throughout our program today, but we recognize up front your personal experience may differ. But hold on to that thought about your personal taste experience and your personal taste preferences, because this is something you can use to help you choose what you want to grow in your herb garden. Now, people are always asking us as master gardeners, what should I grow? And we always say, grow what you like and grow what you like to eat. But sometimes if you're a new gardener or you're new to herbs, you're not actually sure what it is you like. And so we put together a handout. We have a picture of it here, but the full handout is in your class materials. And we're hoping this will help you make good choices about what to grow in your herb garden. On this handout, we have 13 different cultural cuisines. Our thought process was, you probably go to restaurants and you probably go back to some of the same restaurants time and time again because you love those flavors and your family loves those flavors. And so what we put together is a guide to show you key herbs and spices that create the flavors in our favorite cultural cuisines. So if you look at the second column, you'll see herbs and spices that are important to those cuisines that you can grow in your garden in Northern Virginia. The third column is for herbs and spices that you would want to purchase rather than try to grow. So what this shows you is there are a lot of herbs and spices we can grow in Northern Virginia to create and recreate the flavors we love from our favorite restaurants. And if you look at the list for each type of cuisine, you'll see that some of those herbs and spices are used in a lot of different cuisines, which means you get double or triple or quadruple the number of cuisines that you could support if you grow that herb or spice. Now, think about growing what you love to eat, but also where are you going to put those herbs and spices? We want to inspire a little creative thinking, and this is one of our favorite photos for inspiring creative thinking. I love this picture. It is an absolutely gorgeous garden, but I have to say, the first time I looked at it, I felt intimidated. It looks so big and so lush, and my first thought was, I can't do that. I can't do that in my little space. But when you look at it closely, there are actually a lot of great lessons here. This beautiful garden has very little planting space in it. It's a little bit of in-ground gardening. There's a few containers. There's a stone wall and a trellis to take plants vertically. It's really a very small garden, but very lush and highly productive. And we want you to hold on to that concept when you think about gardening in your own small spaces. So let's take a look at some practical ways to do this. And we're going to start small yards. Now, this slide I call small gardens and tuck-ins. If you look at the garden on the upper left picture, this is a small in-ground garden that is completely dedicated to herbs. And it includes herbs that are there specifically to bloom and bring in beneficial insects, which helps it be an even healthier garden. Now, another thing I love about this garden is it has great access for the gardener. You can see a little bit of a path that goes around the garden, but it also has stepping stones inside the garden. And that means the gardener can get into the garden to maintain it and to harvest without compressing the soil. That is really important. If you look at the photo in the upper right, you'll see another small garden that has great access. This is called a keyhole garden. And the gardener can get all the way around the garden to maintain it, but then there's that little keyhole entry point that lets them get inside to reach all the plants in the garden. Now, keyhole gardens are small. They have a small footprint, typically only about 6 feet across. And they're really handy. They don't take up much space. And if you look closely at this picture, you'll see that there's a very small compost bin right in the center of the picture. So that's a place where you can put your brown and green plant material and have it break down and just put it right back in your garden. Now, the picture at the bottom is what I think of as a tuck-in garden. It's an already existing garden. It's there for ornamental purposes. This one has great structure with those small evergreen shrubs and plants. It would be very easy to tuck in some herbs here and they would fit right in. You could put in sage, you could put in a clove basil, even some chives. They would be perfectly at home and just steps away from your back door where you could come harvest and take them inside with you. Now, some of us don't have this much space, or we have space, but it's more challenging. So let's take a look at some other options. Boxes and raised beds. The photo in the upper left is a table garden. This is probably the best access any gardener can have. And if you have someone who maybe has trouble bending or stooping, this is a great option. You can grow herbs very successfully in a table garden, as well as some small bedding plants. Now, another box garden is to the right of that. This is a larger box, and you can buy these and just assemble them. You don't need to build them from scratch, but you can put box gardens anywhere you have the correct sun for the plants you want to grow. It doesn't have to be on the ground. You can put it on a driveway, you can put it on a patio, and as you can see from these larger boxes, you can get a very lush and productive garden. Now, the photo below that on the lower right, this is actually a front yard in my neighborhood that is a really, really steep front yard. So they recently converted it to terraces and it has great drainage and now it's a usable garden space. This photo was actually taken in February. You can see the snow. This is their winter planting. The one thing I would do differently with this if it were my front yard is instead of that center garden, that middle garden, I would actually have a path there for the gardener so that I had good access to the other two beds, but that's just me. Now, if you go on around to the lower right photo, this is a stacked bed garden, okay? So it's like a raised bed, but it's multiple layers. It has great access. Again, it's got a small footprint, so it's easy to reach. And because it's stacked, it creates some microclimates for different levels of moisture. Water is going to flow downwards, so those beds at the top are going to be a little drier environment, and the ones at the bottom are going to be moisture, and you would want to choose your herbs accordingly. Now, speaking of microclimates, there's the granddaddy of all microclimates when it comes to planting herbs, and that's an herb spiral. This is a classic permaculture technique to build an herb garden with a lot of different microclimates and a very small footprint. Again, typically only about 6 feet in diameter. But as that spiral goes around, it creates not only drier soil at the top and moisture soil at the bottom, but also it gets different levels of sun. The southern and western exposures are going to get more direct sun, and the northern and eastern exposures get less direct sun. So you would want to choose your herbs according to their preferred growing locations for this, or growing conditions for this. Now, one neat thing about the spiral too is that you can actually adjust your soil mix and use a grittier or sandier soil at the top if you want to even increase drainage more, and a richer and more moisture retaining soil at the bottom. So you can actually play that up a little bit. Now, we're not going to have time today to get into how to actually build an herb spiral, or for that matter, a keyhole garden. But if you're interested in that and you look in our resource materials that we gave you, you will see links that will take you to steps for how to build both of those gardens, and also videos so that you can see people building them. And then one more thing I want to mention on this particular slide is the two bottom photos. Those are recently constructed herb spirals, and they've just been planted with new herbs. And the one on the bottom right looks really full and lush. It's a great photo op type photo, but Susan and I feel like those herbs are just way too close together. They're going to crowd each other as they try to grow up and mature, and that's not good for the health of the herbs. So if you look at the one on the bottom left that's more sparsely planted, that's actually a healthier planting scheme. It will give the herbs space to grow up and be the size they want to be without crowding each other. That means you'll get more harvest and they will be healthier. Now, one last option, we don't want people who are container gardeners to feel left out. Containers are great, and they're really great for growing herbs. They're wonderful on patios and balconies. They're also great in the yard. One thing that's wonderful about them is they're portable. You can put them wherever you have the correct sun or shade for the plants that you want to grow. And you can bring them inside. You can bring tender plants inside to winter over when you need to do that. One feature we love about this particular photo is how large those containers are. Again, that's the growing space, so your herbs can be really healthy and you get a bigger harvest. And then one last note about containers, they're not just for above ground. There's something called a sunken pot garden that is really a stunning garden for an herb garden. It is tidy, it looks organized, it brings a kind of formal structure to an herb garden. And just like all containers, you can use it to contain your aggressive herbs like mints as well. You just want to be sure with a garden like this that you've established good drainage to keep your plants healthy and happy. So let's transition to actually talking about the herbs themselves. You have this slide in your handout. It's a reference for the 12 herbs we're going to cover today. And I'm going to turn it over to Susan now to talk about the 6 herbs we're presenting for sunny locations.
Thank you, Kathryn. Okay, rosemary is a wonderful plant. It's a perennial evergreen that is equally at home in the landscape as it is in the garden. It has woody stems and very tightly rolled leaves that look like pine needles. It grows about 2.5 feet tall and can get up to 2 to 4 feet wide. Depending on the variety that you grow, it can have pink, blue, or white flowers. And when those flowers occur will vary also depending on the variety. Rosemary likes a dry to moist soil. And by that, we mean low to moderate amounts of water. You'll need to water your rosemary when you first plant it, and you'll need to water it again if we go through extended periods of drought. It is drought tolerant once established, but even in a long period of drought, it benefits from a little bit of water to keep it actively grown. Rosemary is a plant that you want to grow from a transplant. You can start it from seed, but it would take about 3 years in order for the plant to get to a harvestable size. It's pest resistant, but there's a couple tips you need to know about growing it in the winter. If you'll notice on the slide, zone 7, which is where we are in Northern Virginia, is just on the edge of rosemary's growing area. If you're a new gardener, if you've never grown rosemary before, or if you just want some added insurance, your best bet is to grow a winter hardy variety. There's one called ARP, A-R-P. It's probably the most hardy variety, and it's the most readily available. But there are also other winter hardy varieties, including Akaldi, Madeline Hill, and Athens Blue Spires. One other tip for getting through zone 7 winters is that you may need to protect it from wind in the winter. And you can do that by putting a windbreak around it as protection. Flavors and uses. Rosemary's flavor is often described as pine-like, but some people think it has a eucalyptus overtone or even a clove overtone. It goes in all kinds of cuisines. You find it in Mediterranean cuisines, Italian, French, Cajun, Greek cuisines. It's used in a lot of different applications. You can cut it up and mix it in with breads when you're making bread. And another tip for using is when you're grilling. If you're grilling on a charcoal grill, shortly before the end of the grilling time, if you throw a handful of rosemary stems in the grill, it'll give a nice aromatic flavor to whatever you're cooking. It's easy to harvest. You just clip the stems, maybe about 4 to 6 inches, depending on how you're trying to shape your plant. And to get the leaves off, you hold it from the top and run your fingers down the stem. The next herb we're going to talk about is thyme. Thymus vulgaris. It's also a perennial evergreen. Also works well in the landscape. I actually grow mine as edging plants on a perennial bed. It grows from 6 to 12 inches tall and equally wide. Like rosemary, it uses moderate to low amounts of water. Because the stems are kind of wiry, it has a tendency to look ragged after a little bit. So it's a plant that you'll want to cut back severely. And how often you do that, the sources vary. Some people suggest cutting it back severely every year in the spring. Others say every couple of years. I'm usually not organized enough to get it done every year, but my plants do seem to benefit from the cutting back. Like rosemary, it grows best from cuttings or transplants. And it has flowers that attract butterflies and bees. So it's also a good plant for if you have a pollinator garden. Thyme's flavor varies depending on the variety that you're using. The common thyme that we're talking about today, its flavor is sometimes described as sharp, floral, sweet, or peppery. It's also described as warm, pungent, and some people think it has a bit of camphor in the taste. If you grow a lemon or an orange thyme, you'll get those flavors in the thyme. And there are also varieties that taste like nutmeg or caraway seeds. You can harvest thyme at any time during the summer, but it's best just before flowering. And like rosemary, you clip the stems and then run your fingers along them to get the leaves off. Sage is the third in our series of perennial evergreens. It's a very pretty plant. As you can see in this picture, it's got really pretty silvery gray leaves. It grows about 2.5 feet tall and 2.5 feet wide. This is also a plant that tends to sprawl. If you put it in your garden, you want to make sure it's at least 2.5 feet from any other plants in the garden so that it doesn't grow over the top of them. It also likes low to moderate amounts of moisture, and it tolerates rocky soil and drought once it's established. If you're gardening in a warm area, there's a particular variety called Bergarten, and let me spell that for you. It's Bergerten, and it is supposedly, according to Clemson University, it grows better in warm climates. It is the plant that I've grown for years, except for this last year when I couldn't find it, and I have some unnamed variety, which actually is doing quite well. Every 3 or 4 years, you're going to probably want to replace your plant because it's going to sprawl. And even though you're cutting it back on a regular basis, it's going to get to a point where it's mostly woody and not very many leaves. The cool thing about sage too is that, like rosemary, its flowers also attract bees and butterflies. And if you're lucky, you might occasionally get a hummingbird. It needs really good drainage to survive during the winters. And that's an issue in our Northern Virginia soil, which tends to be heavy clay. At a minimum, you're going to want to add compost or other organic material to your soil to improve drainage. And you can learn more about that by going to our virtual classroom at mastergardenersofnorthernvirginia.org and looking at the video on vegetable gardening without fear. This past year, for the first time, I grew my sage in a raised bed, which has a lot better drainage, and I was totally blown away by the well the plant did compared to previous years. Sage, like all the other herbs we've been talking about so far today, the taste varies depending on the type you grow. For this Salvia officinalis, which we've been focusing on, the flavor has been described as musky, smoky, sometimes slightly bitter. In the center of this screen, you'll see a photo of pineapple sage, and its leaves actually taste like pineapple, and they're sometimes used in cocktails. Sage combines with a lot of other flavors. We're actually mostly, at least I was mostly familiar with it using as a poultry seasoning, but it goes in all kinds of Italian dishes. And in a lot of places, it's used to flavor meatloafs and sausages. And sage is one of those plants that you want to think about outside the box. You just clip the leaves. You can use them like lettuce on a burger or in a wrap. You can harvest sage throughout the year, prune the stems and strip off the leaves. Like the other herbs you'll be talking about, you'll get more flavorful herbs in the summer just before it blooms. Sweet marjoram is another very popular herb. It's one of my favorites. I have 2 big clumps of it. It's a tender perennial. So in Northern Virginia gardens, it generally will not overwinter, but we're going to talk a little bit about some tips for that in a minute. It grows about 15 inches high and 15 inches wide. And unlike the other herbs we've been talking about so far, sweet marjoram likes a much moister soil. You can start it by transplants or cutting. And as I mentioned, it doesn't always overwinter well in our area. So you can divide it up in the fall and put it in a pot and bring it indoors. Now, having said that it doesn't overwinter in our area, I will say that I have grown mine outdoors and I'm on the 3rd year of overwintering it. I'm gardening in a highly urban area with a lot of sidewalks, cement driveways, and my herbs are planted next to a stone walkway. And I think that the walkway is acting like a heat sink and helping my herbs to survive. I sometimes can even get a harvest in the winter. We're going to talk more about fertilizer later in the presentation, but marjoram is one where you probably don't need to do much for it in the ground, but when it's in a pot, it'll definitely need a little extra fertilizer to help it do well. And once established, the plants are very drought tolerant. Sweet marjoram has a light, fresh, floral, grassy taste, and it really tastes like a milder form of oregano. It blends well with all kinds of other herbs, and it's a key ingredient in the French herb mix herb de Provence and the Middle Eastern za'atar blend. And in your handouts, we've given you recipes for different herb blends, including examples of both of these, as well as others that we hope will get you inspired to try other combinations yourself. Sweet marjoram is also really good in vinegars and then almost everything else. If you have a recipe that says to use oregano, you can use sweet marjoram and it'll be just fine. You can harvest the plants once the leaves are at least 8 inches tall. And in general, you get best flavor before flowering. Marjoram is one of those herbs that the more you harvest it, the more you get. And when you start to see flowers on the plant, or if you like me sometimes and you don't get quite to all your garden chores in time and it actually goes to seed, you can cut it back about half or even a little bit more, and you'll get a second flush of growth. Some people think that the second flush of growth is more flavorful. I think it's wonderful whenever you eat it. Now let's talk about garlic. All of the herbs that we've spoken about so far are herbs that grow above the ground. Garlic is a spice, and the part that you're getting the flavor from is actually grown under the ground. It's an annual bulb that's made up of individual cloves. And while the clove is underground. It shoots up little grasses. We'll have the picture in the next slide that can get up to 1.5 feet tall and maybe about 6 inches wide. There's two kinds of garlic that are commonly grown by gardeners. One is called the softneck variety, and that is the variety that you're most likely to see in a grocery store. It has smaller cloves, and unlike the hardneck variety, it does not send up a shoot early in the spring. It also lasts a little bit longer once you harvest. It's a better choice for southern gardeners because it can handle some of the fluctuations in winter weather in the south. The hardneck garlic is a larger garlic. It has fewer cloves. It doesn't keep quite as long, but it has these really cool scapes that come up in spring that you harvest them, you cut them off to make the ball bigger, and you can use them like scallions. I had a friend that pickled them once. They were really good. If you're going to grow garlic, the first thing you need to know is you need to buy your seed from a reputable, preferably organic seed purveyor. You do not want to plant garlic from the grocery store. It's often treated with a growth retardant to keep it from sprouting in the grocery store. And of course, when you put it in the ground and plant it, sprouting is exactly what you want to have done. You plant garlic in the fall and make sure that your bed is well weeded and that you keep it weeded throughout the winter. There are some winter weeds that will come up because it does not compete well with weeds. If you're growing the hardneck variety, you'll harvest the scape in the spring, and otherwise, midsummer is the harvest time for the final bulbs. One thing to keep in mind about garlic is it is sensitive to cold and damp, and so while it likes to be in moist soil, if you have a lot of really damp weather in the winter, sometimes it doesn't make it. A great thing about it is that it's resistant to deer and black walnut. And then if any of you garden near black walnut, you know there's not very many things that will grow around the base of that tree. The flavor from garlic comes from a chemical. It's called allicin. And actually, there's no allicin in the garlic clove itself. That's why if you cook with a whole clove, it has a mellow, sweet taste. But you get the sharp, hot, sulfurous taste when you cut or crush the garlic. That releases some other chemicals in the garlic that together combine to make the allicin. Now, allicin is what gives garlic not only its good taste, but its therapeutic values. It's also heat sensitive, so it gets destroyed by heat when you cook. However, there's a trick to making it last longer, and that is if you crush your garlic or chop it and let it sit on your counter for about 10 minutes before you add it to your hot food, the flavor will last longer. And if you eat as much garlic as I do, you've had the dreaded experience of garlic breath. Well, fortunately for us, scientists have researched this, and it turns out that if you follow your heavily garlic-laden dish by eating an apple or lettuce or peppermint, it'll neutralize the chemicals in your mouth that are causing the garlic breath. You have to do this immediately after you eat your garlic-filled dish. It won't work an hour later, then it's too late. So if you're having a salad with a heavily garlic dish, you might want to think about serving the salad after the dish to help avoid the garlic breath. As I mentioned before, you're going to, if you're growing hardneck garlic, you're going to take the scapes off in the spring, and then probably in the midsummer for both hardneck and softneck garlic. Harvest time is about when half the leaves above the ground are starting to brown. Use a garden fork at that point and lift up 1 or 2 cloves, check them out. If they seem to be full and cloves and look healthy, you're ready to go. You can harvest the rest. They need to cure before you use them, and you do that by placing them in a well-ventilated space and letting them dry. And depending on the source you consult, you let them dry anywhere from 7 days to a month. Once the total tops are dried, you can cut them off, or if you want to make a braid, you keep them on, and that's what you use to braid them. Basil is a tender perennial. It's grown as an annual, and what it looks like depends on the variety that you grow. It can get to be 12 to 18 inches tall and equally as wide, and it grows in rich, moist, well-drained soil. The leaves, the picture in this slide is of a Genovese type Italian basil that is has narrow leaves, kind of crinkly. The leaf shape, as I said, can vary depending on the variety. There's one called with lettuce leaves that has really broad leaves that are crinkly, and you can, some of them leaves have different colors as well. They do get a white flower, and when you see the flower, the first thing you want to do is pinch them off, because when it starts to flower, it puts energy into the flower and away from the flavors of the leaves. Good things to know about basil. You want to prune it a lot, and you want to prune it by the branches so that you cutting off stems so that the plant will branch more. And basil has what they call a terminal stem. It's a stem that comes straight up the middle. That's the first thing you want to take out to help encourage branching. And we've already mentioned removing the flower buds. Basil is very sensitive to cold. Sadly, in our area right now, you can go to big box stores and some nurseries, and you'll see these really cute little basils that you'll just be dying to go out and buy and put in your garden. Try not to do it. We have a sort of rule of thumb in Northern Virginia that at a minimum, you want to try to wait and not plant things that are really heat loving until after Mother's Day. Personally, I don't put my basil in the ground until closer to Memorial Day. Last year, we had a heavy frost right after Mother's Day, and a lot of people's gardens got wiped out. The other thing that you need to know is that basil is subject to 2 diseases. You can control for both of them, but you need to be aware of them. These are Fusarium wilt and basal downy mildew. Both of these diseases are caused by pathogens. The Fusarium wilt is a pathogen that's in the soil. The basal downy mildew is a pathogen that is in the air, and it gets blown around and lands on the basil leaves. The good news is that for basal downy mildew, there are now several disease-resistant varieties that you can purchase or grow from seed. And those include Obsession, Prospera, and Devotion are some examples. If you widely space your basil plants too, so that there's good air circulation, that can also help. One thing to keep in mind though, is being disease resistant does not mean it won't get the disease, but if it does, it'll get it later in the season and there may not be as much damage on the plant, leaving you more to harvest. Fusarium wilt is in the ground, and the best way to avoid that is to grow your basil in pots in high quality organic potting soil. I have Fusarium wilt in my garden, and I have to grow all my basils in pots, and they do really well. Basil also tolerates rabbit and deer. Basil's flavor, again, depends on the variety that you're growing. Generally, it's described as having a peppery, sometimes minty flavor. If anyone's growing Thai basil, you'll know that has more of a licorice flavor. Basil goes on everything. You can use it with fresh fruit. Like some of the other examples we've talked about, you can just put the leaves on a sandwich like lettuce. It's a really wonderful, versatile herb. It's also an herb that freezes well for winter preservation, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. You can harvest basil at any point the plant is over 6 to 8 inches tall, and you need to leave at least 4 leaves on a stem when you're cutting it so that the plant has enough leaves to keep growing. And one other tip about basil, if you're cutting some in the morning, you're going to be using it for a meal later on in the day, never store it in the refrigerator. It'll turn black. What you want to do is put the stems in a glass of water at room temperature, leave it out on the counter until you're ready to use it. Okay, are there any questions at this point?
Yes, there certainly are. Glad you asked. There were actually lots of questions about propagating rosemary or sage. Could you go into the process a little bit more?
Let me look at my notes. Hold on just a second here. See what I've got. I have never propagated rosemary, so I cannot speak to that.
I've recently handled a help desk question on that, if I can jump in. Yeah, you can take stem cuttings and use a little bit of rooting hormone and put it in a soilless mix of like a mixture of sand and vermiculite and keep it moist. And once the roots start growing, then you can transplant it to an appropriate soil mix.
I've also done it by cutting the tops of the rosemary, which is not the woody stem, but is the flexible stem, putting it in water, waiting until it developed roots in water, and then putting it in some kind of potting medium to get it ready to go outside. Have you ever propagated sage? There were questions about that as well.
I haven't, but what I would suggest that you do is there's a lot of great online resources. If you Google sage and then follow it with SITE:EDU, you'll get education, university-based sites that will have a lot more detailed information and give you options about other various ways you could do it.
Okay, thank you. Has either of you ever grown watercress, and could you give any advice about that?
No,
Not.
Okay, we'll have them go to the help desk. Are there any herbs that don't like each other that you shouldn't plant near each other?
I know that alliums can be a little tricky,
Yeah.
but I can't give you specifics off the top of my head, but typically you sort of keep your alliums together.
Okay,
the only other thing I would suggest is you want to, separate from whether the plants get along, is making sure that you plant things that like the same moisture conditions next to each other. So if you're planting things that like it dry, keep all your dry herbs in one spot and herbs that like more moisture content in another.
yeah, good hint. There were several participants who have never seen a garlic scape. Can you talk about what that actually looks like and what you're cutting when you cut the scape?
What will happen is, if this is only with hardneck garlic, it's a stalk that comes up. It looks like a stem of a flower, and it actually is a flower stem, and there won't be anything else around. You'll just have that. So and that comes off, and sometimes it's a little curly. It's not always straight, but it's just a single stalk.
One person described it as a tail. Do you think that's a fair, a fair description?
I suppose it depends on what animal the tail is connected to.
Okay. Susan, there were a couple of questions about winter hardy rosemary. And I know you mentioned one was ARP, A-R-P, but
Right.
could you mention the others again?
Sure. Hardy Hill.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Or, I'm sorry. Yeah. Hardy Hill, or sometimes it's called Hill Hardy. Madeline Hill. Athens Blue Spires. And Acaldi.
Okay. You had mentioned that a lot of herbs taste best if you harvest them before they flower.
Mm-hmm.
But assuming you want to collect seed, you would probably let some of them flower a bit, right?
Right.
Yes.
That's
okay.
true. And I also have to say that my palate's not sophisticated enough. I grow all the herbs we've talked about today, except for garlic, and I think they taste wonderful no matter when I eat them. Perhaps not in the middle of the winter, but the rest of the time they're great.
That's wonderful. Someone asked, do any of the herbs act as bug repellents in your garden? Can you use them that way?
I've seen some anecdotal information about that, but I can't speak to that. Usually what I'm looking for is something that will attract beneficials into my garden.
Yeah.
What would some examples of those be?
Well, thyme is a really good example.
Okay.
We're not talking about it today, but dill is one of the best.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I assume you'll.
If I can jump in just for a moment. In permaculture, alliums, particularly the ones that stay in the ground and are not harvested annually, are thought to offer some protective qualities. They may be used as borders around beds for that reason. And I'll be presenting mustard seed a little later, and that is used in vineyards and orchards. The plants are because they have some qualities in terms of nematodes in the soil and helping to prevent damage with nematodes.
Oh, excellent. That's good to know. Okay, let's see. There was just one question about what do you mean by a tender perennial versus an annual?
An annual is a plant that has to be planted every year. It grows, flowers, and dies in a single growing season. A tender perennial is a perennial that would come back year after year in a southern climate, like in Florida or Georgia or someplace like that. But the winters in Northern Virginia are too cold and it won't last through the winter in our area.
Okie doke. I think you're going to say no, but are there any herbs that can survive in low light?
No, I mean, they all need a little bit. Some are grow more. Kathryn is going to be talking next about some
Not so sunny.
plants that do better in partial sun conditions. You know, I think what both of our feelings is if you've got a low light area, give it a try. You're not out anything and you might be surprised. And I have to say that I have one marjoram plant that grows under a red leaf maple and it's in almost full shade and it grows really well.
Okay, great. I think that's good for now, and we can get back to your presentation.
Okay. So let's switch and talk about herbs for partly sunny locations. And I'm going to confess up front that the first three plants I'm presenting are not hardy in Northern Virginia, but they will thrive here if they're grown in containers and given some protection from the cold. And I love all three of these herbs. So the first one up is sweet bay laurel. Laurus nobilis is the Latin name, and this is a beautiful evergreen tree that's native to the Mediterranean. You are going to grow it in a container, and you want to start with a transplant because these are really hard to propagate. You're going to plant your little tree in well-drained potting mix, and you want to let the soil dry out a bit between waterings. Don't let it get bone dry, the tree will die, but let it dry out a little bit between waterings. These trees love our hot, humid summers. They just can't handle our cold winters. But in warm weather, put it outdoors in part sun, and it will be a happy camper. And then before the temperatures dip below 40, you want to bring it back indoors, put it in bright, preferably natural light, like a southern window, and it'll make that transition really well. Now, bay laurel is a slow growing tree. This picture here, it's sort of a monster tree. Most of us will never see a bay laurel tree get that big, but it is beautiful. Yours is going to come small and it will be easy to keep it small. You want to prune your trees at least once a year, even when they're little, to encourage growth because they are slow growing, and that little bit of pruning will encourage them to grow more. And remember, you can use those pruned leaves in your cooking, so don't feel bad about doing that. You're also going to want to prune the roots every 2 years, and that will give you a chance to freshen up the soil with some new potting mix and also put a little compost in there. Now, bay laurel does like a little bit of fertilizer. It wants to be fertilized in the spring and early summer, but it wants to be a balanced fertilizer, not a high nitrogen fertilizer. That high nitrogen will give you more growth, but you will get less flavor in the leaves. So you don't want to do that. Now, in terms of the flavor itself, bay laurel's flavor is subtle. From my perspective, the fragrance is most similar to that of black tea leaves, kind of a subtle version of that. It's a little bit sweet, it's a little bit savory, and those are the flavors and qualities that it actually brings to a dish when you cook it. We use the whole leaves typically, and we put them in a dish that's going to simmer for a long time. You need that moisture and that heat together to release the flavor in the leaves and infuse it into the dish. But you want to be sure and remove the leaf before you serve the dish because Those sharp edges are actually dangerous if swallowed. That leaf does not soften when you cook it. Now you can harvest at any time, but best flavor combined with best growth for the plant is midsummer. At that point, the plant has stopped actively growing and it's putting its energy back into the leaves again. In terms of regular pruning, you want your plants to be at least 2 years old. When you prune, it's okay to use the fresh leaves if you want to, but know that the best flavor is going to come after they've been dried out for a few weeks. And unlike most of the herbs we're talking about today, it's actually the older, bigger leaves that are the most flavorful. Once you harvest them, you can dry them on a paper towel on your countertop. You can put them in a sunny window. They dry really well. And then just store them in a sealed container or pop them in the freezer sealed up, and they'll keep their flavor really well. Now, changing gears, ginger. Zingiber officinale is the Latin name. This plant's not quite as pretty as a bay laurel tree, but to me it looks like a little tiny bamboo plant. It gets about 4 feet high and about 3 feet wide when it's given as much space as it wants. What we recognize as ginger is actually what we call the ginger root. It's really a rhizome, and you can see a picture of that up top on the slide. Ginger is a tropical forest plant, so it's certainly not hardy here, but we can grow it well in a big, wide container. It wants moist, rich, organic soil, and it wants part sun. Morning sun is fine too, but part sun, and it loves our heat and humidity. In terms of planting it, you want to start with a smooth rhizome that's got some smooth, healthy looking buds on it, and plant it just below the soil surface. Water it very lightly, keep it very lightly moist until you see the new growth coming out of those buds. And at that point, you can water it more completely. And you also want to fertilize it regularly. And you want to use a fertilizer that contains some phosphorus because that helps those rhizomes to grow. Now, this being a tropical plant, it wants to come inside before temperatures drop even to 50. It is truly a heat-loving plant. So avoid the wet. Moisture is great, but not soggy. Avoid the cold because the rhizome will just rot. And avoid full sun because that will damage the foliage and you'll end up with poor growth. Now, in terms of its flavor, ginger has a big flavor, and I think we're probably all familiar with ginger ale, ginger snaps, gingerbread. Spicy, citrusy. It can also taste kind of sharp and hot. It's a key component in curries and in stir fries. It makes a great tea. And interestingly, it pairs well with flavors like chocolate and citrus flavors like lemon and lime. And all parts of the ginger plant are actually edible. We're familiar with the rhizome, what we call the roots, but the eyes, the new shoots, even the stems and the leaves are all edible. In terms of the shoots and the leaves, they have a milder ginger flavor, and you can use them chopped up as a garnish on top of another dish, just like we would do with like onion chives. So if you harvest at 5 to 7 months, it's going to be a mild ginger flavor. If you want peak flavor, then you want to let it go to about 9 months. And harvesting, there's 2 methods you can use when you're growing it in a container. You can harvest from the edge of the container, from the outside of the container inward, just dig in, remove some of the rhizome, backfill, and create more space for your plant to create more rhizomes. Or you can dig up the whole plant, which is very easy to do. If you do this, you want to set aside some rhizomes right away and plant them soon to start your next crop of ginger. You want to remember to save those shoots and leaves, because you can use them as a garnish. The stems are tougher, but you can use them in things like broth. It's very easy to just throw it in and get a little bit of mild ginger flavor in your broth. And then for the rhizomes, what we would call the roots themselves, wash them, let them air dry, and then just break them into the sizes you want. And for best flavor retention, store them in the freezer. That's best for long-term storage. Now, ginger's cousin turmeric, curcuma longa is the Latin name, and this is a gorgeous plant to grow as a home gardener. I love those big leaves. It's like canna lily leaves. It looks really lush and tropical. And of course, it gives us those beautiful orange turmeric rhizomes as well. Again, you want to grow it in a container. They recommend at least 15 inches wide. I will tell you that in terms of growing ginger and turmeric, my containers are not quite that big. They're about 12, 13 inches. They did just fine, but I think the plants would have produced more if I'd had wider containers last year. With turmeric, I also recommend a heavy container because if you're going to have it outside, like on a patio, those big leaves can get caught by the wind. So either use a heavy container or one that's really deep where you can have the soil weight to help stabilize the plant. Now, just like ginger, it likes a rich, fertile, moist soil. It actually likes to be planted a little deeper, at least 2 inches. It also wants to be kept evenly, consistently moist, but not soggy. And turmeric takes a little longer to sprout. It'll take weeks and in my case, months, and that I understand is not uncommon. So be patient with it. Now, in terms of its flavor, we're probably all most familiar with the dried version of turmeric. It's spicy, it's earthy, it's a little bit bitter, and it's actually that bitter component of dried turmeric that harmonizes the other flavors in blends like curry blends. But the fresh turmeric has a very different flavor. It's floral and it's very grassy and fresh tasting. Whether you use the dried or the fresh, you get that beautiful golden color, kind of the signature color of curries, but also it's the bright yellow and yellow American mustard. It's used for all sorts of commercial dyes. And if you work with the roots in your kitchen, I can tell you, you will stain your fingers, you might stain your clothes. So you want to be careful with that. If you haven't used fresh turmeric before and you want to try it, it's really easy to just incorporate it into meals. If you stir fry, throw a little fresh turmeric in with your fresh ginger and try it that way. Add a little bit to soups, to stews. When you make broth, put it in broth. And you can make a really beautiful rice. Just put a little bit in the water before you boil it and add your rice, and you'll get a little bit of that turmeric flavor as well. Now, both turmeric and ginger bloom, but they virtually never bloom in cultivation, growing them in a container garden. But if you are lucky enough to get a bloom, it's edible too. And in Asia, these are eaten as vegetables, so just go for it. In terms of those big leaves, they're too tough to actually, they're edible, but you're not going to want that texture. But what you can do is you can use them like you would use banana leaves to wrap things that you're going to steam cook, like fish or meat or even desserts. I have not done that yet, but I plan to. I think that would be kind of cool. Harvesting and preserving is exactly the same as with ginger. Now, very different plant, cilantro / coriander. Okay, Coriandrum sativum is the plant, and it gives us both the herb, cilantro, and the spice, the coriander seed. And this is a fast-growing, cool season annual crop. It's very easy to grow from seed, but unfortunately, it does not like our heat and humidity. It's an early spring crop and then can be grown again in the fall. Morning sun is ideal for this plant because it's not crazy about our heat. When you plant it, it will come up in about 3 weeks and it will mature in what feels like the blink of an eye. It is really quick to mature. So if you want an ongoing continuous supply to harvest, what you're going to want to do is plant a few more seeds like every 3 weeks to keep your harvest going. The magic temperature range for this is between 50 and 85 degrees for the cilantro leaves. Once the temperature exceeds 85 degrees, it's going to bolt, which means it sends up that flower stem and then starts producing its seeds. Now, that's not bad news because the seeds are the coriander seeds, which is the spice. But if you want the leaves, the cilantro leaves, then you can do in hot weather what I do, which is grow them indoors as microgreens. And I can just sow new crops in little dishes and keep my supply going that way. And it grows without bolting and going to flower and seed. If you're interested in microgreens, we have a class on that in our virtual classroom. So you can go and learn and see just how easy it is to grow microgreens. Now, in terms of flavor, okay, cilantro is probably the most polarizing flavor dispute in the country. Some people actually have a genetic variant and it causes cilantro to taste soapy to them. But for the rest of us, it tastes earthy, it tastes kind of peppery, maybe a little bit citrusy. And it's an herb that you want to use fresh. It does not dry well. It's great to toss it into salads. We love it in salsas and pico de gallo. Use it chopped up as a garnish on top of other dishes. If you want to put it in a dish that's hot, like a tortilla soup, take the soup off the heat source and stir the cilantro in at the last minute. Hold on to some of that flavor. Or you can just do what I do, which is sprinkle it on top as a garnish. Now, contrast that with the coriander seeds from the same plant. Flavors could not be more different. Coriander is warm, it's spicy, it's nutty, it's not controversial. Amy Stewart, who is a botanist and also a best-selling author, describes coriander as tasting like very good gin. So whether or not you like very good gin, coriander does have a great flavor. It's great at baked sweets like pies and cakes. It's great in savory dishes, which is what I love. Curries, stews, meats, even sauces. If you make your own chutney, it's great in chutney. Now to harvest these two crops, cilantro, easy peasy, let those little stems get up at least 6 inches tall and just clip them off. Use them right away. If you want to save some, just wrap them loosely in plastic and you can refrigerate them for up to a week. The seeds, you do not want immature coriander seeds. They're really bitter. You want to leave them on the plant until the pods are completely dry. That's when you're going to get the best flavor, and that's going to take about 90 days. You'll see the pods turning a gray-brown color, and that's when it's time to collect them. They may start shattering. If you see any shatter, you want to harvest them right away because you don't want them all going all over the ground. Just put them in a paper bag. Put the bag in a cool, dry location in case there's any residual drying that needs to happen. And then after a little while, shake it when they're dry, roll them around in your hands, loosen them up, and that's your harvest. You've got your coriander seeds. Okay, now another seed, I love mustard. Another herb that we're going to cover or spice is mustard seed. And in this case, brown mustard, Brassica juncea, is the Latin name. This is actually another twofer plant. Instead of an herb and a spice, we get a vegetable and a spice. The vegetable being the green mustard greens that you can put in salads. Now, we're not going to focus on the greens part. We're going to focus on those spicy brown seeds. But the plant itself can be a pretty green, like what you see on the slide here, or it can be a reddish color as well. These are nice to grow as a border. You'll see on the next slide, they have really bright yellow flowers when they go to flower, and those flowers have a really sweet fragrance, and they also are a great attractor of pollinators, especially bees. So very healthy plant to have in the garden that way. Like cilantro, they're really easy to grow from seed. They like a rich, moist soil. You want to sow them early. You want to sow them about 3 weeks before the expected last frost date. And if you're growing them for the greens, you also want to use row covers because they are prone to whiteflies and a few other pests. They're going to flower and go to seed in the heat of summer. And that's when you start looking forward to harvesting your mustard seeds. Now, to have enough seeds to make at least a few batches of homemade mustard, you're going to want to grow at least a dozen plants, I would say. That's enough to have some fun with. You can plant it again in late summer for fall greens, but just like with cilantro, you're not going to get the flowers and seeds in the fall. You're just going to get the greens. Now, in terms of flavor, I think we're all familiar with mustard flavor. It's strong. It's got kind of a hot, pungent punch to it, a little bit bitter, a little bit floral. To make the actual mustard condiment, the prepared mustard, All you have to do is crush those seeds and mix it with a liquid. That's mustard. You can add any flavorings you want to, but it's the crushed seeds and the liquid together that creates mustard. The liquid you choose determines how hot and pungent your mustard is going to be. So for instance, if you make mustard with crushed seeds and vinegar, it's going to be pretty mild. It's just going to have a little bit of a zing to it. If you make it with beer, it's going to be a little bit hotter and zingier still. I make mustard a lot, and most of the recipes I use call for water, or at least mostly water. And interestingly, water creates the hottest mustard of all, and cold water creates a hotter mustard than hot water does. So think about that. Acid, alcohol, and heat all produce milder mustards. They reduce the volatile compounds in those crushed seeds, and that reduces the heat of the mustard. So that's something you can enjoy playing around with in your kitchen to get the heat level you like on the mustards that you make yourself. Now, in terms of harvesting your mustard seeds, again, you want those pods to get completely dry. They'll be a light brown color. And then the easiest thing to do is just throw down a drop cloth under them and just rub between your hands and release the seeds. Clear out the trash. You can make your mustard right away or just store them in a cool, dry place. Because this is a plant that self-sows freely, if you're going to grow them to seed, you should collect the seeds. Otherwise, they can become weedy plants, and we don't want that. And then our last herb of today is mint. Everybody should grow mint. There's lots of different mints, and the one I'm highlighting today is spearmint, which is my favorite, Menthes baccata. And it has an absolutely lovely sweet fragrance and flavor. It's also easy to grow. It's perennial. It loves rich, moist soil. And if you put it directly in the ground in the soil, it will spread like crazy. It does spread by runners, and it can be pretty aggressive. So we recommend growing in a container to contain it. I love the photo on the slide. It was taken by a professor in Mississippi who collected a bunch of abandoned old ice chests that were like blowing off the backs of pickup trucks and just abandoned on roadways. He put drainage holes in there, and each one of them holds a different mint in his mint collection. And I actually had to cut that photo down a lot. It just went on and on with all these different mints, but it's great. Each one has plenty of space to grow, and he gets a big harvest. And mint is one of the herbs that goes to bloom. Let it do that. Butterflies love it. And after it blooms, just shear it back. You'll get a lot of new growth, and that is the growth that has the best flavor. Now, what you see here are 4 pictures of 4 different mints. In the upper left is orange mint, which has a citrusy flavor. And then across from that is chocolate mint. And down below in the bright green, my favorite, spearmint with its sweet flavor, great in teas. And then to the left with the purple flower is peppermint, which has the cooling sensation. And there's one mint here that misrepresents itself, and that's the chocolate mint. Chocolate mint is exactly the same mint as orange mint. It has an orange citrusy flavor. It just has the chocolate coloring on those darker leaves. So this is a buyer beware notice. When you're buying a mint, make sure you're getting the flavor and the fragrance you want, as opposed to what is written on the label. Now, I think we're all familiar with using mints in teas and cocktails, etc. My personal favorite use for mint is as a chopped garnish. I love putting it on a big, savory, kind of hearty dish, just sprinkling across the top as a garnish. It brightens it. And my absolute favorite is to then squeeze a little fresh lemon juice on top as well. It's just the best combination in the world. In terms of harvesting your mint, cut off the whole stems and then just remove the leaves and any flowers that you want for your dish. That also encourages new growth. Like Susan has talked about for some of the other herbs, for peak flavor, you want to harvest just before the flowers appear. Like her, I harvest throughout the season, but if you want to harvest to freeze it for later, take advantage of that peak flavor opportunity, and that's when to harvest it and freeze it so you have it in the middle of winter. It does not dry well like cilantro, so you do want to freeze it instead. And speaking of mint and winter, leaves will often survive as green leaves deep into winter, but boy, the cold really hits the flavor. So you want to just pick them fresh, freeze them well, and enjoy them in the middle of winter by taking them out of your freezer. So with that, do we have any more questions now, Colleen, about herbs?
Yes, I'm afraid we do. There were lots of questions about bringing your potted herbs indoors in the winter and what you do about light, what you do about insects. Do you have to change the soil so it doesn't get too damp or I mean, how do you handle that, I guess is the question.
Right. Well, I don't take my bay laurel outside. It's so small, I don't need to. But in terms of the ginger and turmeric, I bring the whole pot inside. And I guess I've been lucky so far, but I have not had a problem with insects or insect damage with them. It may be because they're rare here, so they don't necessarily have a lot of natural pests here. But I just bring them inside. I have a sunny window, that's a southern exposure on the front of my house. And they are both part sun plants. So I actually put them at the back of the planting space and they get just part sun, but it's bright light and they've done really well. So maybe I've just been lucky there.
What do you think about the full sun herbs? Do they need any kind of different treatment if you bring them in, or they can't be brought in the winter? I think someone mentioned bringing a rosemary plant in the winter. Would you do anything different for that?
Susan, do you want to take that or do you want me to jump on
Oh,
it?
go ahead. I have a follow-up though, for when you're done.
Okay. I have brought rosemary in as a small plant a couple of times and it starts out great. But by the time I get well into winter, it's got little aphids and other things. I have no idea where they come from. But I will say I did not de-insectify it before I brought it in. So I didn't spray it with insecticidal sprays or anything like that, just because I don't like putting that on things I'm going to eat. But I have had a lot like bringing herbs like that in for a while and then putting them back in a protected place on my back porch on mild days. And that helps to mitigate some of that. I didn't do that this year and I didn't have as much luck with them as a result.
I just wanted to remind you of the document you found. I think it was from the University of Missouri about overwintering herbs. That was so handy.
Yeah, and that I believe is one of our links in our handout list, isn't it?
No, we didn't that
It
one's
isn't?
not there. No.
Okay, all right. You know what we can do? Then we can find it and add it to the site for our class when the class is recorded for those who want to find that reference. We can do
great.
that.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
There were questions about how exactly you prune laurel roots and when you should do it.
Yeah, root pruning is its own thing, but basically what you're doing is you're taking the plant out of its pot and you are removing the outer rim of the roots. And what that does is any wrapping or compression of roots, it cuts those loose and it frees up space for new roots to form. And then so when you put it back in that pot or slightly larger pot, I would say go to a larger pot, and add fresh soil around it, you've got space for new roots to form and reach into that new potting soil.
And so for doing that, you would use some kind of potting soil mix or?
Yeah, with bay laurel, when you root prune, what you want to do is then add some fresh potting mix and also add a little compost to that. That's what you want to do when you repot.
Okay. Has either of you ever grown holy basil or Tulsi basil? And is there anything different about it? Or do you have recommendations on types?
Yeah, I don't know if you've grown it, Susan. I've grown it. No. Okay, I've had mixed experience with it. I grew it from seed and I actually got seed that produced a holy basil that had very poor taste quality. But my neighbor grew it and hers was great. So I would say be careful of your source in terms of having the flavor. It grows easily from seed, and if you let it go to seed, it will come up again year after year. And that I have experienced that, and unfortunately, I'm experiencing it with a holy basil that doesn't have good flavor. So choose well up front, and then it will come back for you.
You happen to know the variety your neighbor used?
I don't. I
Okay.
don't.
Okay. Is either of you worried about ginger being invasive and therefore would grow it in a container?
Well, we grow in a container because we have to, but because it's not hardy, it's not really a risk for us in Northern Virginia in terms of it getting loose anywhere.
Okay. Are there any, I know you mentioned a lot of herbs that like sun. Are there some that are particularly tolerant of very hot afternoon sun?
Maybe the Mediterranean herbs, Susan?
I would say rosemary, thyme, those would be the two that would first come to my mind.
Okay. Someone asked a question about whether you might put diatomaceous earth on top of the soil when you bring it inside to combat pests.
I've never worked with that. I don't know. Do you know, Susan?
No, I don't.
Okay. And finally, someone wanted to know if you knew of any mint with fuzzy leaves.
No. Are they trying to identify a mint they have? If they
Yeah.
are,
Yes.
yeah, if they are, they should take really good photos of it. If it blooms and they have photos with the bloom, that would be great. Send that to the help desk and we'll try to track it down for them there.
That sounds good. Okay, that was it for the questions.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to hand it off to Susan to talk about growing and using your herbs.
And I know we're a little bit tight for time. So what I'm going to do is speak very briefly to these slides. And then if you have additional questions, we'll be happy to handle them during the question and answer period. Most of the plants that we've talked about today, you're going to be starting from, or many of them, we're going to be starting with the transplant. As Kathryn has mentioned before, when you go to the store, make sure you take the Latin name with you so you know you're actually getting what you want. And you also want to check the plants to make sure that they are healthy and not bringing bugs into your garden. If you buy a plant that's not in good shape, no matter how great your garden is, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to have it recover. Root-bound plants are an issue, and we'll talk about that in the questions and answers if anyone is interested. Once you get your plants home, they have to be acclimatized to the outside growing conditions before you put them in the ground. And that means exposing them to wind, light, and fluctuating temperatures. And in order to do that, you put your herbs outside the first day you bring them home in a protected shady area for maybe a half an hour to an hour and a half. Then you bring them back in the house. Every day you take them out and leave them for a longer period of time, bringing them back in at night until after about 7 to 10 days or maybe 14 days, you're leaving the plants out for 24 hours, at which point they are ready to grow in the ground. Once your plants are growing, get to know them and how they're doing. They'll let you know if they've got any problems. The good news about herbs is that the essential oils that make them smell so wonderful and make us want to eat them are also natural pest repellents. If you do find a bug, don't panic. The first step you want to do is find out what it is, because 95% of the bugs in your garden are no problem, and some of them are predators and good for your garden. You want to have them there. So there's lots of online resources you can use to identify bugs, or take a picture and send it to the help desk, and they'll help you know what it is and if it's something you need to worry about or not. When you're checking your plants, this is a time to check for moisture. Stick your finger in the soil, see how it feels, knowing whether to water, and use reputable online resources for fertilizers. Some of the plants that we've talked about today won't need additional fertilizer. Some do. The main lesson on fertilizer is that it's plant specific, and you need to follow the information that you get from a reputable source, preferably a site::edu site. Growing herbs is a blast. Eating them is even more fun. But before you can eat them, you have to harvest them. And we've talked about specifics for harvesting when we've talked about the individual plants. There's also a few general things that apply. Cut them, harvest them in the morning after the dew is dried before it gets hot for the best flavor, and cut clean. Make sure your hands are clean and your tools are clean and sharp in order to harvest. You can harvest for annuals up to 50 to 75% of the plant. It'll come back. For perennials, it's up to 30% of the growth and it'll keep going. Be sure to always leave some leaves on your annual plants or your plant won't make it. We've given you a handout with suggestions for ways to eat herbs fresh and to cook with them. The key thing here is to know that green herbs are like lettuce. They're high in vitamins A, C, and K. You want to use them quickly and chop them just before using because the aroma that causes the wonderful smell and taste will evaporate over time. You can see the slide with the directions for using fresh herbs cooking, and we'll be happy to answer any questions about that at the end of the program. There's multiple ways that you can preserve your herbs for future use, assuming you haven't eaten them all when they first produce. You can freeze, you can dry, and you can use them in vinegars and oils. Each herb does better in some circumstances than others, so you need to research the herb that you have to find out the best way for preserving it. And I particularly want to flag vinegars and oils because there are very serious food safety issues involved with making those. And one of your handouts is select online recipes for using some of our featured herbs. And there is a handout and a link for making vinegars safely and for making oils safely. And we strongly urge you to follow those directions. Oils in particular, if they're not handled well, can be breeding grounds for botulism, and you definitely do not want to deal with that. The growing practices that we've talked about today are what master gardeners call best management practices. You want to make sure that your soil's in good shape. You want to put the right plant in the right place. That means not planting your basil and rosemary together or planting a full sun plant in a place where it's 100% shade. That being said, you probably can work around the margins a little bit with sun. If you're not sure, try it. You might be pleasantly surprised. And also think about environmental stewardship. A lot of the plants that we've talked about today, when they flower, are great for pollinators, bees, and butterflies. You might want to throw a few extra plants in just to support nature. And lastly, as you're moving along and you're growing your garden, if you have more questions, know that the Master Gardeners and the Virginia Cooperative Extension Services are great resources that are available to you. And if you live in regions outside of Northern Virginia, there are extension agents all across the country. I want to particularly call your attention to the online resources that you'll find at the Virginia Tech Cooperative Extension site and our own resources on the www.gnv.org website. That's the one the Master Gardeners maintain. There's a wonderful herb supplement. It gives you year-round pointers for how to grow herbs and what to do in every season with all kinds of examples. Kathryn has mentioned the help desk. No, we're there. And we have demonstration gardens throughout Alexandria and Arlington where you can see some of the plants that we're growing. I think they have some in, there's an herb garden. We showed a picture at the beginning of the presentation from Glen Carlin. Not everybody has herbs, but the gardens are still great to visit. And you can always ask a master gardener a question in person while you're there. And with that, I know I went through that really quickly, but I want to be respectful of people's times. Do we have any questions on the growing or preservation or any of the things that you've thought about the earlier presentation that you want to ask now?
There was a question from someone about, would you mind listing what you think are the best herbs to grow indoors in the winter?
Oh, goodness. I've never done indoor with herbs. And I should take that back. The one time I tried, I killed them. So I'm not the person to ask about that.
I would say chives are always really easy to grow indoors, and whether it's garlic chives or onion chives, they give a nice fresh flavor to use as a garnish. I've had luck with basil. If I keep it indoors, I don't bring it in from outdoors. It doesn't get real big. I don't have it in a big pot, but it's done just fine in my kitchen window. And by the way, talking about herbs in kitchen windows, let's show our last slide to our audience while we finish up our questions.
All righty. Someone asked if you'd mind talking a little bit about dill.
I can talk a little bit about dill. It's a wonderful plant. It grows easily from seed. You can eat the leaves. They have a milder taste. You can let it go to seed, and the seeds have a stronger taste. Dill has been used in making pickles since the 17th century. It's a fabulous pollinator. It attracts all kinds of insects to the garden, and you can use it in a wide range of cooking. It's a really low maintenance herb to grow.
Okie doke, great. A question about, is there a way to preserve garlic cloves other than drying them or storing the whole bulb?
I think you can freeze them, but I would definitely go online and look it up. There's some great resources. There's particularly one from the University of California. Most of the garlic in the United States that's grown commercially is grown in California. So they have a lot of great resources on their website for that.
Yeah, the other thing you can do is if you're a canner, you can pickle them and make them shelf stable and store them that way.
Okay, great. Well, we've gotten lots of nice comments, including ones that this presentation was phenomenal. So thank you very much.
Thank you.